The chamber of the Sovereign Assembly hung in the upper atmosphere of Salith Prime, a sphere of polished alloy suspended above a sea of clouds the color of bruised fruit. 11 thrones ringed the open floor, each carved from the heartwood of a homeworld, each occupied by a delegate whose civilization had survived the long climb out of its own gravity well. None of them were human. Admiral Thessari of the Vresh stood at the center, her 4 arms folded behind her back, her long neck bent forward in the posture her people used for solemn judgment. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The species-designated Sol-3 has crossed every red line drawn by this body, she said. In 200 standard cycles, they have moved from chemical rockets to folded space travel. They have refused our offers of guidance. They have begun colonizing systems outside their grant. They breed beyond models. They learn beyond models. They adapt beyond models. Her dark eyes swept the ring. Tomorrow, they will be peers. The cycle after, they will be sovereigns. The cycle after that, they will be our judges. A delegate from the Makari clicked his mandibles, a sound like dry leaves. You ask us to vote on annihilation. I ask you to vote on continuity, Thessari said. Theirs or ours. The vote went around the ring. The Tavrian abstained. The other 10 lifted their voting stones into the light. 10 stones, 10 yeses. The motion passed before the second sun of Salith Prime had cleared its zenith. Only one delegate remained silent through it all. Her name was Vextal Arami, and she watched the stones rise with the dawning horror of someone who had finally understood what room she had walked into. She lifted no stone. She also did not speak. The fleet was already gathered. The assembly had known how the vote would land before the first speech was given. 2,000 warships dropped out of fold above Earth at the same instant, in a shell that surrounded the planet at lunar orbit. Humanity had a defense grid. It was a good one. It held for 19 minutes. Then the orbital platforms cracked open like seed pods, and the bombardment began. Captain Adrian Voss watched it from a viewport 6 light-years away, his hand pressed flat against the alloy as if he could reach through it. He had been ordered to this post. He had argued against the order. He had been overruled by a woman who knew her daughter would die in the second wave and chose to send her husband away anyway, because someone had to remain to throw the switch. Earth's continents lit up in patterns he recognized from training simulations. New York, London, Lagos, Tokyo, Buenos Aires. He counted them like a man reading the names off a grave. A transmission cut through the static, a woman's voice, military, steady, breaking only at the edges. All stations, this is High Command actual. The atmosphere is no longer breathable. Repeat, atmosphere is no longer breathable. To anyone still listening from the dark, we did not deserve this. We never asked for this. Remember us. Remember what they did. And if you can, make them. The signal cut. Adrian Voss did not weep. He had done his weeping in the briefing room 2 months earlier when the order had been handed to him in a sealed envelope. He turned from the viewport, walked the long, curved corridor to the chamber at the heart of the hollowed moon, and placed his palm on a panel that had waited for this print for a quarter of his life. The panel read him. The panel accepted him. A voice that was not quite a voice, that had been built from the recorded last words of every soldier humanity ever lost, spoke from the walls around him. Lazarus protocol acknowledged, operator confirmed, sleep cycle commencing, wake conditions, confirmed extinction of homeworld, estimated duration undefined. He climbed into the pod. The lid closed. In the dark between stars, something humanity had built in absolute secret began the long, patient work of waiting. The galaxy moved on. In the cycles that followed the burning of Earth, the assembly broadcast its victory in 100 dialects. Children on Makari colonies were taught the lesson in their first year of schooling. Aggression unchecked becomes plague, and plague must be cut from the body of civilization before it spreads. The lesson came with images. Adults made sure the children looked. The Vresh established a permanent monument on the moon humanity had once called Luna. It was a spire of polished stone the height of 3 mountains, etched with the names of every assembly soldier who had died in the operation. There were 208 names. The assembly did not record the names of the dead on the surface below. Earth itself was catalogued as sterile class 9. The atmosphere was burned to a thin acidic haze. The oceans had boiled and refrozen into salt flats laced with heavy metals. Tourist ships from the inner systems would sometimes pass through the system at a respectful distance, and the guides would say the same words in a dozen languages. Here is what happens when a young species refuses to grow up. For 60 cycles, the lesson held. Then the mission started disappearing. Not many at first. A survey vessel sent to chart a sector outside the Assembly's grant boundary failed to return. A pirate clan that had been a problem for decades on the Tavrian Rim went silent in the same standard month. The Assembly's Intelligence Directorate flagged the events, found no pattern, and filed them under attrition. Vextal Arami read the reports anyway. She was old now, by the standards of her species. She had outlived 3 of her own children and most of the colleagues who had voted with the Stones. She kept a small office on the 72nd floor of the diplomatic spire on Salith Prime, and she kept a private list of dates. The dates were not random, she had checked. Each disappearance lined up with a sector that touched, however lightly, on the old fold route maps from before the burning. Routes that humans had used. Routes the Assembly had inherited and stopped using because of the superstitious unease such maps tended to produce in younger officers. She did not share her list with anyone. She had learned, in 60 cycles of being the delegate who did not lift a stone, that listening was safer than speaking. 3,000 light cycles from her office. A hollowed moon in a system that had never been named registered a change. Deep in its cavity, banks of quiet machinery had been counting heartbeats more precisely. 200 years earlier, humanity's last engineers had seeded every world they touched with a subatomic identifier they called the marker. Every human carried it. Every human passed it to their children. It did not glow, did not transmit, did not interfere with any biological function. It simply existed and could be counted at distance by a sensor sensitive enough. The hollow moon had such a sensor. For 2 centuries, the count had hovered at approximately 12 billion, give or take the cycles of birth and death. Then it had dropped sharply to a number that fit on a single screen. Then it had dropped again, more slowly, as scattered survivors had been hunted to their last breaths by the Assembly's cleansing patrols. Then it had hovered for years, at a number small enough to count on the fingers of 2 hands. Then it had reached 1. That one was Adrian Voss, sleeping in the pod. When the last unrelated human heartbeat outside the moon went still, an old woman in a hidden bunker on a moon of an outer giant, who had outlived everyone she loved and finally let go, the counter ticked to 0 outside the chamber. The protocol read the number. The protocol verified the number. The protocol cross-checked the number against every backup sensor across 40 light years. 0. A low hum began in the walls of the chamber. Lights that had not lit in 200 years woke in sequence along the corridor that led to the central pod. The hum rose to a note that was not unpleasant, only patient, like the breath of a thing finally exhaling. Inside the pod, Adrian Voss's heart, which had been beating once every 6 minutes for 2 centuries, accelerated. His eyes, behind their closed lids, began to move. The first thing Adrian Voss felt was cold. The second thing he felt was the weight of his own body, the strange overcorrection of muscle that had been dormant for longer than empires lasted. He could not move his fingers at first. Then his fingers moved. He counted them. There were 10. He counted them again to be sure. The pod's lid drew back with a hiss of clean atmosphere. He sat up, and the room tilted, and a servitor arm extended toward him with a cup of something warm and bitter. He drank it. He had been trained for this moment in 100 drills, in a life he could barely remember now. The voice in the walls spoke. It was the same voice that had put him to sleep, and it had not aged. Operator Voss, you are awake. Time elapsed since induction, 204 standard years, 8 standard months, 6 standard days. Homeworld status confirmed sterile. Species status confirmed extinct. You are the last. Adrian Voss set the cup down. His hand did not shake. He had used up his shaking before he climbed into the pod. Show me, he said. The walls of the chamber went transparent, or seemed to. They were not glass. They were a projection so detailed that for a moment he believed he was floating in open space above a world he no longer recognized. The continents were the shapes of his childhood, more or less. The colors were wrong. There were no clouds. There was no blue. He watched the recording of the burning. He watched the orbital platforms crack. He watched the final transmission from High Command, and he heard his wife's voice in the static behind the commanders because she had been on that bridge and her console had been close enough to pick her up, and his wife had been laughing. Not from joy. From the kind of laugh a soldier laughs when there is nothing else left to do. He had not known that recording existed. He let it play to the end. When it was done, he stood up. Show me the inventory. The walls reorganized. Schematics filled the air around him. He walked through them, and they moved aside for him, deferring like courtiers. Lazarus had not been a single weapon. Lazarus had been a doctrine. Humanity, in the cycles after first contact with the assembly, had read the room with the clear eyes of a species that had spent millennia studying its own genocides. They had smiled at the diplomats. They had signed the grants. They had built the embassies. And they had quietly poured 1/10 of their planetary output into a contingency the assembly was never meant to see. 400 autonomous warships, scattered across 100 dark systems, each one keyed to the operator's biometrics and nothing else. Each one larger than any vessel in the assembly's fleet. Each one carrying weapons developed from physics the assembly's science councils had judged too unstable to pursue. The instability had been the point. A network of fold relays that did not appear on any star map outside the moon. A library of every assembly transmission ever intercepted, indexed by species, by region, by command structure, by family tree. A list of names. 312 names. The architects of the vote. The captains of the burning. Their descendants. Their descendants' descendants. A target list. Voss read the list. He read it 3 times. He recognized some of the names from the briefing he had received before he slept. Others were new, children born to the architects after the burning, children who had grown into admirals and ministers on the strength of their parents' victory. How many of the original 312 are still alive? He asked. 81, the voice said. And their direct descendants. 4,960. Voss closed his eyes. When he opened them, the schematics were gone, and the walls showed only the empty dark outside the moon. Wake the fleet, he said. Confirm Operation Lazarus, full execution. He thought of his daughter. He thought of her laugh at 4 years old, the way she had pronounced his name with 2 syllables because she could not manage 3. He thought of his wife on the burning bridge. Confirmed. In 100 dark systems across the spiral arm, 400 ships opened their eyes. Admiral Thessari was eating breakfast when the First World went dark. She was old now by the standards of the Vresh, though her 4 arms still moved with the precision that had made her famous in the war colleges. She lived in a tower on the southern coast of Salith Prime, in a suite that overlooked a private bay where the tide came in twice a day across white sand. She had earned the view. She had paid for it in the only currency that mattered, which was the burned bones of 12 billion strangers, and she did not regret the transaction. Her aide entered the breakfast room with the careful gait of a person bearing bad news. Thessari did not look up from her fruit. Speaker. Admiral, we have lost contact with the colony at Threthvon. Lost as in storm interference. Lost as in the colony is no longer there. Thesari set down her utensil. Define no longer there. Long-range telescopy shows the planet is intact. The atmosphere is intact. The cities have been removed, not destroyed, removed. The foundations are bare. There are no bodies. There is no debris. The population was 60 million. They are not there. The fruit on her tongue had lost its flavor. She rose. She walked to the window. The tide was coming in. Send a fleet. We did 3 hours ago. The fleet is not responding. The transmission reached the diplomatic spire 40 minutes later. It arrived on every screen on Salith Prime at once, and on every screen in every system inside the Assembly's reach. Broadcast on a frequency the Assembly had banned its citizens from listening to, but had never managed to actually silence. The image was a man, a human male by the proportions of the face, though no living being in the Assembly had seen a human face in person in 2 centuries. He was older than the recordings, which had all been taken before the burning. His hair was the color of cooled iron. His eyes were a pale gray that did not blink as much as the watchers expected eyes to blink. He spoke in standard Assembly trade tongue. His pronunciation was archaic but understandable. My name is Adrian Voss. I am the last human. I am also the first answer. He paused, and the watching billions across the arm felt the pause more than the words. 204 years ago, 11 delegates sat in a room and voted to end my species. 10 of those delegates lifted their stones. They had names. I have those names. They had children. I have those names too. He held up something small. A black stone, polished, slightly translucent. It looked very much like the voting stones of the Assembly chamber. This is the last voting stone humanity ever cast. We did not cast it then because no one asked us. We are casting it now. He set the stone on a surface in front of him. He stepped back from it. The target list is published. Every name on it knows who they are by tomorrow's dawn on their homeworld. I will come to each of them in order. I will give each of them the same warning I am giving the Assembly now. There is no negotiation. There is no surrender. There is only the list, and there is only the time it takes me to reach the bottom of it. He paused again. You voted to make us extinct. I am not here to make you extinct in return. Extinction is too clean. I am here to teach the galaxy what your great-grandchildren's great-grandchildren will tell their children about you. That you were the generation that murdered a species in its cradle, that you were celebrated for it, and that, in the end, the cradle had teeth. The screen went dark. In her tower, Thesari stared at the empty wall for a long time. Her aide had not moved. The tide had reached the high mark and begun to fall. Get me the list, she said. The aide swallowed. Admiral, you are on it. The Assembly's response was a fleet. It was not a small fleet. It was the largest formation the Assembly had assembled in 3 generations. 6,000 warships, drawn from every member system, crewed by the finest officers in the spiral arm. It gathered above Salith Prime in 3 days. The diplomats called it a deterrent. The admirals called it a hammer. The citizens, watching from their balconies as the ships blotted out the second sun, called it a prayer. Adrian Voss met it with 80 ships. He did not bring his full strength. He had decided, somewhere between the 3rd world and the 7th, that he wanted the Assembly to understand the math. 80 against 6,000 was a number their staff colleges would have to teach for the next 1,000 years. He wanted the lesson clean. The battle lasted 11 minutes. The Assembly's flagship vented atmosphere from a wound that the analysts later determined had been inflicted by a weapon no surviving sensor had been able to record. The escorts that turned to defend her were no longer escorts by the time they completed the turn. The outer screen collapsed inward, and the inner screen collapsed outward, and the formation that had taken 3 days to assemble unmade itself in the time it took a Salith child to recite the names of the moons. Voss did not pursue the survivors. He let them run. He wanted them to carry the story home. In the cycles that followed, the worlds on the list began to receive their warnings. The warnings were not threats. They were appointments. A specific date, a specific hour, written in the local calendar of the receiving world, delivered to the named individual through whatever channel made the delivery most precise. A senator received hers via the cup of tea her servant brought every morning, the date etched in the foam. A general received his via the inside of his own helmet display, in the moments before he gave the morning briefing he had given for 30 years. A retired admiral received hers via the voice of her dead spouse, recorded from a transmission the assembly had archived without realizing it had been intercepted. The senator died on the date. The general died on the date. The retired admiral did not wait. She walked out into the snow of her family estate the night before, and the search teams found her in the morning under a tree she had planted as a child. The Assembly's intelligence directorate scrambled. They tried jamming. The warnings kept arriving. They tried evacuation. The warnings followed. They tried hiding the named in fortified bunkers beneath their capitals. The warnings still came, often delivered by the bunker's own internal speakers, in voices the targets recognized as their own. Voss did not enjoy any of it. He noted, in the private log he kept in the Moon, that he had expected to enjoy it. He had expected a kind of grim satisfaction. What he felt instead was the same flat weight he had felt the night he climbed into the pod, only heavier now, because there was no one beside him to share it. On the 83rd day of his campaign, a signal reached his command vessel through a channel that should not have been open. It was a personal channel, coded to a frequency humanity had used in the years before the burning. No living being in the assembly should have known it existed. He took the call. The face that appeared was old female of a species he recognized from the archives. A Tavrian. Her name plate, written in the small text the Tavrian preferred, read Vextal Arami. She did not waste words. "I was in the room," she said. "I did not lift a stone. I am not asking for my life. I am asking for one conversation before you take it." Voss studied her. The archive had a file on Vextal Arami. He had read it the night he made the target list. Her name was not on the list. He had checked it 3 times. "You are not on the list," he said. She closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, they were wet, in the way Tavrian eyes wept, which was not very much. "I know," she said. "That is why I am calling. There is a thing I need to tell you that the list does not contain. May I come aboard?" He thought of his wife. He thought of his daughter. He thought of the chamber where 10 stones had risen and 1 had not. "Come aboard," he said. She came alone in an unarmed shuttle with a single document case and no honor guard. The protocols on Voss's flagship scanned her 7 different ways. She was carrying no weapons. She was carrying no transmitters. She was carrying, in the document case, a stack of paper. Real paper. The kind that did not exist anymore in the assembly, except in private libraries of the very rich. He met her in the observation chamber, with a viewport that showed the long dark behind them and the small bright dot ahead that was the throne world of the Vresh. She set the case on the table between them. She did not sit. "Before I begin," she said, "I want you to understand something. I am not here to plead. I am here because I have carried this for 200 years, and you are the only person left in the galaxy who has the right to receive it." She opened the case. Inside were transcripts, hundreds of pages in 3 scripts. The top page was in human English. "These are the minutes of the closed session that preceded the vote," she said. "The session the public was never told about. The session in which the assembly debated, for 19 hours, whether your species was actually a threat or whether we were inventing one to justify a war we already wanted." Voss did not touch the pages. He looked at her instead. And the conclusion of the session, on the record, was that your species was not yet a military threat. that you would not be a military threat for another 4 to 6 generations, that the projections suggesting otherwise had been authored by a single intelligence cell on Salith Prime, headed by Admiral Thessari, who had personal reasons to want a war with your species. Reasons that had nothing to do with security. What reasons? Vextal Arami held his gaze. Her firstborn died on a survey mission in the Outer Rim, 3 cycles before first contact. Cause of death was officially recorded as engine failure. Privately, the wreckage showed that the ship had been struck by a fragment from an experimental human probe that had drifted off course. Your people did not know, could not have known. The probe was unmanned and its trajectory had been corrupted by a magnetic event no one had predicted. Thessari knew. She buried the report. And she spent the next 30 years building the case for your extinction. The chamber was quiet for a long moment. The dot ahead grew slightly larger. "Why are you telling me this now?" Voss said. His voice was lower than it had been. "Because you are going to her tower tomorrow," Vextal Arami said. "And before you arrive, I wanted you to know that the woman who murdered your species did it because of an accident your species did not know it caused. I do not say this to soften her. I say this because if you go in there believing she hated you, you will give her more than she deserves. She did not hate you. She did not even know you. She used you. She used your entire civilization as a coffin for one grief she could not face." Voss said nothing for a long time. The dot kept growing. "What do you want from me?" he asked at last. "Nothing," she said. "I have what I came for. I told the last human what we did and why and to whom. I would like to be returned to my shuttle. I would like to go home and finish dying in my garden. The list is the list. I am not on it. I do not ask to be added or removed. I ask only that when you stand in front of Thessari tomorrow, you remember that she was not a monster. She was a mother who could not bear her own grief, and she made a galaxy carry it for her." She closed the case. She stood very still. Adrian Voss looked at her for a long time. Then he stood, walked to the door, and opened it for her with his own hand. "Go home," he said. "Finish your garden." She paused at the threshold. "What will you do?" she asked. He looked past her, at the dot that was now a disk, at the world where the architect of his species' extinction was eating her breakfast. "I am going to ask her the question I came to ask," he said, "and then I am going to do what the answer requires." Thessari was waiting for him in the breakfast room. She had dismissed her staff. She had dismissed her guards. The tower's defenses had been ordered to stand down on her personal authority, and the assembly had screamed at her through every channel they had until she muted the channels. She sat at the table where she had eaten her breakfast every morning for 60 years. The fruit had not been brought. The chair across from her had been pulled out. When Adrian Voss walked into the room, she did not stand. She only inclined her long neck the precise degree that the Vresh used to acknowledge an equal who had come to call a debt. He sat in the offered chair. He set no weapon on the table. He did not need to. The bay outside the window was empty. The tide was halfway in. "I have read the transcripts," he said. She closed her eyes for the time it took to count 3 breaths. When she opened them, they were dry. "Then you know. I know about your firstborn. I know about the probe. I know the case for our extinction was a coffin you built for a grief you could not bury yourself." "Yes. Was it worth it?" The question hung in the room like a held note. She considered it with the seriousness of a soldier inspecting a wound she had been ignoring for 60 years. "At the time, yes," she said. "I told myself a story in which your species was a future predator and my child was a present warning. I believed the story because I needed to believe it. I have believed it every morning of every cycle since. I have believed it through 3 of my own grandchildren being born. I have believed it through the building of this tower and the view of this bay. I believed it as recently as yesterday. I am told that today I do not believe it anymore. I am told this because the man who outlived my mistake is sitting across from me, and I cannot look at him without seeing my son." Voss said nothing. He let her finish. "I will not ask for my life," she said. "I will ask one thing. Do not pretend when you do it that you are doing it for justice. Do it because you are a father and I killed your daughter. That is the truth. The rest is decoration." He looked at her. He thought of his daughter pronouncing his name in 2 syllables. He thought of his wife laughing on the burning bridge. He thought of the 81 names still alive on his list, and the 4,960 descendants behind them, and the cycles of grief he could plant in this galaxy if he chose to. He stood up. "I am not going to kill you," he said. Her head came up. For the first time in their conversation, something in her face moved that she had not chosen. "You are going to live," he said. "You are going to live in this tower with this view, and you are going to write the true history of what you did. Every name, every meeting, every lie. You are going to publish it under your own seal, and you are going to read it aloud on the public channel of every member world of the Assembly in your own voice, for as many years as it takes for every child on every world to know the story by heart. You are going to be the monument to my species that you tried to prevent us from becoming. And when you die of old age in this chair, the recording will keep playing. Forever." She stared at him. He saw, at last, the thing she had been hiding under the four-armed posture and the precise inclinations of the long Vresh neck. He saw the woman who had buried her son and refused to be done with him. "That is worse," she whispered. "Yes," Voss said, "it is." He left her there. He did not visit the other 80 names on the list. He sent each of them a copy of the transcripts Vextal Arami had given him, and a copy of the recording he made of Thessari's first reading, broadcast 3 days later to every world the Assembly held. The names took their own roads after that. Some chose Thessari's road. Some chose shorter ones. Voss did not interfere with either choice. He had stopped being the answer. He had become, instead, the question the Assembly would have to answer to itself every morning for as long as it lasted. He returned to the hollowed moon. He walked through the corridor of lights one last time. He stood in the chamber and looked at the pod that had held him for 2 centuries. He did not climb back in. He sat down on the floor beside it, in the quiet, in the long dark between stars. And at last he allowed himself to weep for his wife and his daughter and his species, in a room that had been built to hold a weapon and had ended up holding a man. The voice in the walls did not speak. It had been built from the recorded last words of every soldier humanity ever lost, and it understood, in whatever way such a voice could understand anything, that some words were not for it to say. Outside the moon, the galaxy turned. The story of what humanity had been, and what one human had chosen at the end of it, began the long work of becoming legend. Humanity was extinct. Its monster had let them live. And the stars, which had watched the whole thing in silence, would carry the lesson forward for as long as there were stars.